Mae Whitman didn't cry when they threw her father's receipts in the sawdust. She didn't cry when the laughter hit her like a wall of heat. She pressed her palms flat to the saloon floor, splinters biting her skin, and she made herself a promise she would stand back up. She always did. But standing up was the easy part. What came next would cost her more than she ever expected, and save her in ways she didn't know she needed. Before we begin, if this story moves you, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Mae's story travels. The summer of 1883 came to Red Creek like a punishment. The heat pressed down on the town from the moment the sun cleared the eastern ridge, and by mid-morning, every board on every porch was warped and pale as old bone. Dust hung in the air even when the wind wasn't blowing. It lived there, settled into everything, into the creases of men's necks, into the folds of women's skirts, into the gaps between the planks of the Rattlesnake Saloon, where Mae Whitman was about to have the worst morning of her 27 years. She hadn't wanted to come in through the front door. She knew better. Any woman alone in Red Creek knew better than to push through those bat-wing doors before noon, when the drinking had already started, and the gambling tables were warm, and the men had nothing better to do than find something to feel bigger than. But the side entrance was padlocked. She'd checked twice, and the man she needed to see was inside, and Mae Whitman had not ridden 6 miles in July heat to turn around because the situation was uncomfortable. Uncomfortable was what she could handle. It was losing the Whitman ranch that she couldn't. She pushed through the doors. The noise dropped about half a measure. Not silent men like these didn't go fully quiet for a woman walking in alone, not in Red Creek. But there was that shift, that collective readjustment, like a pack of dogs lifting their heads from a water trough. She felt every eye in the room pull toward her, felt the slow grins that followed, and she kept her chin level and her eyes moving until she found what she was looking for. Harlan Deeds. He was sitting at the far table, the one nearest the back wall, playing cards with 3 men she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, soft in the middle, in the way that came from years of cheating other men out of their labor with a mustache. He waxed too carefully, and fingers that had never done a hard day's work. He was the man her father had trusted to register the land deed transfer before he died. He was the man who had taken the filing fee and come back with paperwork that Mae had only recently realized might not be worth the ink dried on it. She crossed the room. The floorboards were sticky underfoot. She could smell last night's whiskey sour and warm, and beneath it, something else, boot leather and tobacco, and the particular smell of men who'd been sitting in close quarters since before breakfast. Nobody moved to stop her. They were all watching too carefully for that, too pleased with the situation, already sensing something was coming that they could enjoy. Mr. Deeds. He looked up from his cards. He took his time about it. Well? He leaned back in his chair, letting it creak. Mae Whitman, you look like something the heat dragged in. One of the men across from him snorted. She didn't look at them. I need to talk to you about the deed registration, she said. The county assessor's office sent a notice to the ranch last week. They say there's no record of the transfer. They say the land is still listed under my father's name, and since he died without a registered heir. That don't sound like my problem, Deeds said pleasantly. You took $20 from my father 3 months before he passed. You told him you'd file the transfer personally. You looked him in the eye and... I told your daddy a lot of things. He set his cards face down on the table carefully. Your daddy was a sick old man with a failing memory. I wouldn't put too much stock in what he thought he heard. The blood came up in her face so fast it made her dizzy. My father was sharp until the week he died, she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended, which was worse. Quieter meant she was closer to the edge than she wanted to be, and men like Deeds could smell that. I have a receipt with your name on it. Receipts get mixed up all the time. He picked his cards back up. Especially when a woman's trying to make a claim she can't prove. You got a piece of paper that says, I filed the deed. Or just a piece of paper that says your old man gave me money for something. It says, because those are 2 different things, sweetheart. The word landed like a slap. She heard someone at the bar laugh a low rolling sound, the kind men make when they want to signal to each other that they're all on the same side, and the side isn't hers. She reached into the canvas satchel at her hip and pulled out the receipt. It was folded into quarters slightly soft at the creases from being handled. She'd read it so many times the ink had started to blur at the folds. She set it on the table in front of him, smoothing it flat with her palm. He glanced at it. Then he reached out and picked it up between two fingers, holding it the way a man holds something he's about to throw away. This says your father paid $20 to H. Deeds for land services rendered. He looked at her over the paper. That could mean anything. It means what it says. Or it means your daddy hired me to look into something and I looked into it and what I found wasn't what he was hoping for. He shrugged. Sometimes that's how it goes. Give me back that receipt. Or what? He set it on the table, but not in front of her, closer to his side, closer to his cards. His voice had dropped its pleasantness. What was underneath wasn't anger exactly. It was boredom. The particular boredom of a man who had done this before and already knew how it ended. You going to take me to the sheriff? Clyde Morrison's going to spend his afternoon on a dead man's handwriting because a woman came into his office upset. He smiled. Go ahead, May. You go ahead and try. She reached for the receipt. His hand came down on top of hers. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to stop her. Hard enough that she had to either pull against him or stand still. And either way, the room saw it. She pulled. He let go, but he'd already moved the receipt back, and when her arm came free with nothing in it, the motion threw her off balance. She stumbled. The satchel swung into the edge of the table. The cards scattered. One of the other men grabbed his whiskey glass before it went over, and in the half-second of chaos, Deeds shoved back from the table, not reaching for her, not doing anything anyone could name exactly, and the edge of his chair caught her in the hip, and she went down. The floor came up hard. Her palms hit the sawdust first, then her knees, and for a moment, she was just there on the floor of the Rattlesnake Saloon in Red Creek in the middle of the morning, with splinters in her hands and sawdust on her dress and 20 men looking at her. The laughter started somewhere on her left. It moved through the room like something rolling downhill slow at first, then picking up, then loud enough that she could feel the vibration of it in the floorboards beneath her palms. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise about that somewhere around the 3rd week after her father died, when she'd realized the weight of what she was carrying, and understood that crying about it was a luxury she couldn't budget for. So she pressed her palms flat against the sticky boards, and she breathed, and she looked at the sawdust 2 inches from her face, and she did not cry. Careful now, Deeds said from somewhere above her. His voice was back to pleasant. Floor's slippery. More laughter. She started to push herself up. You need help, someone at the bar called out. It wasn't an offer. It was a punchline. She got her left foot under her, then her right. She was halfway up when she became aware, in the way you become aware of weather, changing a pressure shift before rain, that something in the room had changed. The laughter had stopped. Not tapered off, not wound down naturally. Stopped like a hand closing over a flame. She didn't know why yet. She was still getting up, still focused on the mechanics of standing knees straight chin level. Don't let them see anything. But she felt it, that collective stillness, the way 20 men in a room went suddenly careful. She stood up. She straightened her dress. She turned around. There was a man in the far corner of the room that she hadn't noticed when she'd come in. He was sitting at the corner table, the one angled, so it had sight lines to both the front door and the bar. The kind of seat a man chose deliberately, not for comfort. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, not whiskey, and a hat pulled low enough that she hadn't clocked his face from across the room when she'd been scanning for Deeds. He was big, not in the exaggerated way of men who worked at being big, but in the settled structural way of someone who had spent years doing physical labor in all kinds of weather, and his body had simply adapted to it. Broad through the shoulders. Hands that rested flat on the table without moving. He was looking at Harlan Deeds. Not at her. Not at the room. Just at Deeds. And Harlan Deeds was not looking back. Nobody was meeting this man's eyes, she realized. The men at the bar had found very interesting things to study in their glasses. The card players at the surrounding tables had gone still. The bartender was polishing the same spot on the counter he'd been polishing for the last minute. The man in the corner hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't stood up or reached for anything. He was just sitting there with his coffee, and the entire room had reorganized itself around the fact of him. He had a scar that ran from the left corner of his jaw down the side of his neck. An old one, silver pale against tan skin, the kind of scar that came from something serious and had been there long enough that the man wearing it had stopped thinking about it. His eyes, when she could see them clearly beneath the brim of his hat, were dark brown and completely steady. He looked at her once. Just once, and briefly, a fast assessing glance the way you look at someone to confirm they're still standing. Then he looked back at Deeds. The silence stretched. Deeds cleared his throat. He picked up his cards. He set them back down. He reached for his whiskey glass and thought better of it. "Something you want, Callahan," he said. His voice came out almost steady. The man Callahan said nothing. Deeds laughed. It was a bad laugh, short and thin, the kind a man produces when he's trying to sound like he isn't afraid and produces the opposite effect. "Just sitting there." All right, that's fine." He waved a hand at May without looking at her. "We were done here anyway." "Were we?" May said. Deeds's eyes snapped back to her. She had not planned to say it. It came out of something lower than planning, something that had been sitting in her chest since she hit the floor. Not anger exactly, but something harder than anger, something with more structure to it. She picked up the receipt. Deeds had moved it closer to his side of the table, but he hadn't put it in a pocket. And in the silence following whatever it was that Callahan's presence had done to the room, nobody moved to stop her. She folded it into quarters and put it back in her satchel. "I'll be at the assessor's office Monday morning," she said, "with this receipt and a letter from my father's doctor confirming that Robert Whitman was of sound mind in the months before he died. If that deed transfer isn't on record by Friday, I'll be asking the county to look into every land transaction you've filed in the last 5 years." Deeds stared at her. "You think you can—" "I think," she said, "that I am done standing in your saloon." She snapped the satchel closed. "Good morning, Mr. Deeds." She turned and walked to the door. Her legs were steady. She was almost surprised by it. She'd expected them not to be expected the shaking to hit now that the moment was over. But they held, and she kept her shoulders back, and her pace even, and she pushed through the batwing doors into the wall of summer heat. Outside, the street was bright and colorless with sun. She stood on the boardwalk and let herself breathe. Just for a moment. Just long enough to register that she was upright and outside, and her voice had come out steady, and she still had the receipt. The door behind her opened. She turned, already braced, already reaching for the next thing she might have to say, and stopped. It was Callahan. He didn't come all the way out, just stepped partway through the doorway enough to be in the shadow of the overhang. He looked at her with those steady dark eyes, and he took his hat off briefly, a quick, clean gesture, the kind that meant something in the language of men out here, and cost nothing to give. "Ma'am," he said. Just that. One word. She looked at him for a moment. The scar on his jaw. The quiet way he stood, like a man who had learned to occupy exactly the amount of space he needed, and no more. "Thank you," she said. She wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. He hadn't done anything technically. He'd just sat there. But something about that sitting there had changed what happened in the room, and she was too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. He nodded once. He settled his hat back on his head. "You the Whitman daughter," he said. "Robert Whitman's girl." She straightened slightly. "I am." He looked at her for a moment in a way that wasn't rude, but was direct, the way a man looks at something he's trying to take the full measure of quickly. "Your father was a good man," he said. "One of the few I'd say that about in this county." She felt something move in her chest that she didn't have a word for. It wasn't grief exactly. She'd learned to carry grief flat and steady like water in a shallow pan, learned to move carefully so it didn't spill. It was something adjacent to grief. The sudden, unexpected weight of someone saying the right, true thing. You knew him, she said. Bought water rights from him 6 years back. Straight dealing, fair price. He could have pushed harder, and he didn't. He paused. I heard he passed in the spring. March, she said. He nodded again. I'm sorry for it. She looked at him, at this big, scarred, quiet man, standing halfway out of a saloon door at 10 in the morning, holding his hat in his hands and telling her he was sorry for her father's death. And she thought, I don't know who you are. She thought, you just sat in a corner and didn't say a word, and somehow rearranged the whole room. She thought, my father knew you and called it straight dealing. Jake Callahan, she said. It wasn't a question. The name had made it to her before the man had. People talked about Callahans spread up in the ridgeline country. Talked about it in the ways people talked about things they were slightly afraid of and slightly in awe of, which out here usually meant the thing was real. Yes, ma'am. May Whitman, she said, though he'd already known it. I know. He glanced back toward the saloon, toward the bat-wing doors, and something shifted briefly in his expression. Something that came and went too fast for her to name. Deeds is going to be a problem. He already is a problem. A bigger one. He met her eyes again. He's not working alone on this. The paperwork issue with your deed that doesn't happen by accident. Somebody helped it not happen. She went still. What do you mean? I mean, Harlan Deeds couldn't find the county recorder's office without assistance, and somebody with more reach than him has been buying up land claims in this part of the territory for the past 8 months. Your father's spread sits on the only ridge access to the North Grazing Plateau. He paused. That makes it worth something to someone who wants to control what goes in and out of there. She stared at him. The heat pressed down on both of them. Somewhere down the street, a horse stamped and blew. She was aware distantly that people on the boardwalk were finding reasons to slow down near them to appear occupied with things that required them to stand within earshot. Who? She said. Don't know yet. He said it like a man who intended to know. But I'd suggest you don't go back in that saloon alone. And I'd suggest you get your father's papers, all of them, not just the receipt, somewhere safer than your ranch, until you know who you're dealing with. She looked at him steadily. Why are you telling me this? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she had the sense that he said exactly as much as he meant to say, and silences with him weren't hesitation, they were punctuation. Your father did right by me, he said finally. And what happened in that room wasn't right. He held her gaze. That's enough reason. It was a simple answer. She had the feeling it was also the complete one, that there was nothing underneath it, that he was hiding, no angle she needed to find. He meant what he said. The directness of it was almost startling in a county where she'd spent the last 4 months learning that almost everyone meant something different from what they said. She adjusted the satchel on her hip. Monday morning, she said. County Assessor's Office, 8 o'clock. He looked at her. All right. She didn't ask him what he meant by that. She wasn't sure she was ready to know yet. She turned and walked to where her horse was tied at the rail. Old Henry, a bay gelding with opinions about summer heat, and she untied him and swung up. And she did not look back at the saloon, and she did not let herself think too hard about the splinters in her palms, or the sawdust still caught in the folds of her dress, or the sound that laughter had made when it moved through that room. She thought about what Callahan had said instead. Somebody with more reach. Someone who wanted the ridge access. Someone who had helped a piece of paper disappear. Her father had trusted the wrong man. That happened. Her father had been sick, and she'd been stretched thin between the ranch and the medical bills, and she hadn't checked the paperwork as carefully as she should have, hadn't followed up, hadn't pushed. And now she was standing on the wrong side of a gap in the county records, and someone was waiting on the other side of it with a plan she didn't fully understand yet. But she had the receipt. And she had her father's doctor's name written in the back of her journal, and she had apparently the attention of Jake Callahan, which was something she hadn't gone looking for and didn't entirely know what to do with. Henry moved under her, slow and reliable in the heat. She pointed him toward home. Behind her, Red Creek went back to its business. The Rattlesnake Saloon noise picked back up, card games, resuming, voices finding their levels again. Harlan Deeds said something at the back table that made one of his companions laugh. Inside the saloon in the corner with the sight lines, Jake Callahan sat back down at his table. He picked up his coffee cup, found it had gone cold, and set it down again. He looked at the table for a moment without seeing it. He was thinking about Robert Whitman, who had looked a man in the eye and named a fair price without being asked. He was thinking about Mae Whitman, who had gotten up off that floor without making a sound. He was thinking about Harlan Deeds's soft hands, and the particular kind of smile that men wore when they were certain they were protected. Men were only that certain when someone was protecting them. He pulled a small notebook from his vest pocket. He wrote 2 words in it in handwriting that was cramped and careful and took up very little space. Ridge access. He closed the notebook. Outside, the summer heat pressed on. In the distance beyond the rooftops of Red Creek, the mountain ridgeline ran north like a wall, green and pale blue, in the haze holding something on the other side of it that someone wanted badly enough to make a dead man's deed disappear. Jake Callahan picked up his cold coffee and sat in his corner and thought about what a man had to be willing to do to get that kind of reach in a county like this one. He thought about Mae Whitman's hands flat against the saloon floor. The sound she hadn't made. He drank the cold coffee. Monday morning, he decided, was close enough. Mae didn't sleep that night. She lay on her father's old mattress. She still thought of it as his, probably always would. And she stared at the ceiling, and she listened to the ranch settle around her, the way old wood settles in summer heat, slow creaks and small shifts. The sound of something that had been standing a long time and intended to keep standing. She'd lived her whole life inside those sounds. They'd never felt threatening before. Now she counted them. She had the receipt. She had it folded in the tin box under the floorboard beneath the washstand, the same place her father had kept the deed itself, and the water rights paperwork, and the small leather wallet with $43 in it that she hadn't been able to bring herself to spend yet. She knew the papers were there. She'd checked twice before she lay down. She'd probably check again before dawn. Somebody with more reach. That was what Callahan had said. Not Deeds working alone. Someone behind Deeds, someone who wanted the ridge access, someone who had helped a piece of paperwork disappear quietly in a county recorder's office without anyone making a fuss about it. She turned that over in her mind, the way you turn a stone looking at each side. Who in Red Creek had that kind of reach? The obvious answer was the one she'd been trying not to think about since she rode home, because the obvious answer was a name she wasn't ready to say out loud, yet even to herself. Names had weight out here. You didn't say certain names carelessly. She got up before sunrise. There was no point lying there thinking when she could be doing something instead. She built the fire, made coffee, checked on the 2 remaining horses and the 6 head of cattle she hadn't been able to sell yet, and she sat at the kitchen table with her father's papers spread in front of her, and she went through every document he'd ever filed or received or kept going back 12 years. By the time the sun was fully up, she had found 3 things that made her stomach drop. The first was a letter dated 14 months ago from a land acquisition company out of Denver called Crestline Holdings. It was addressed to her father, and it made a polite formal offer to purchase the Whitman Ranch and adjacent grazing rights for a price that was fair enough to be insulting, fair enough that a man would think it was legitimate, not so much that he'd feel like someone desperately wanted what he had. Her father had written no across the top in his careful handwriting, underlined twice, and filed it away. The second was a second letter from Crestline Holdings dated 9 months ago. This one offered 20% more. Her father had written no again, and beneath it in smaller writing asked around. Dunmore connection. Dunmore. There it was. The name she hadn't wanted to say. Calhoun Dunmore owned the Lazy D spread to the east, 3,000 acres of summer range and year-round water, and he had the county commissioner and 2 of the 3 district judges in his pocket. Everyone in Red Creek knew it, the way everyone knew which way the river ran in spring, as simple geography as fact. He was 61 years old, and he had been acquiring land in this county for 30 years, and he had never once been held to account for a thing. Because men like Dunmore never were not in places like this, not without something so solid, it couldn't be argued away. May read her father's small handwriting 3 times. Dunmore connection. He'd suspected. He'd known something was wrong, but he'd been sick, and he'd been trying to manage the ranch, and he hadn't pushed it far enough, hadn't gotten far enough before March came and took him and left her standing in the middle of an inheritance that was apparently already under siege before she even knew to defend it. The third thing she found was the most recent. A handwritten note, no envelope, folded small and tucked inside the back cover of the ranch ledger. Dated 6 weeks before her father died. In writing, that was shakier than his earlier letters, weaker but still clear, still his. May. If anything happens before I get this sorted, check the north fence line. 3rd post from the creek bend. I put something there in 81. You'll know what to do. She read it twice. She sat with it for a long moment. Then she got up, put on her boots, and went out to find out what her father had buried at the base of a fence post in 1881. The north fence line was a 40-minute walk from the ranch house in summer heat, through the upper field where the grass had gone dry and yellow at the tips, past the windmill that needed a new blade, and the water trough she'd been meaning to scrub out since April. She walked it with the note in her pocket and her hat pulled down against the glare. 3rd post from the creek bend. It was a cedar post, old and weathered, with a split running partway down the grain from some old lightning hit. She found it without trouble. She crouched down at the base of it, at the south face where the ground was driest, and she dug with her hands. She found a tin box about 8 inches down. Smaller than the one under the washstand, the size of a tobacco tin sealed with wax around the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small brass key. The paper was a survey document. Hand-drawn meticulous, her father's careful lines dated 1881. It showed the full property boundary of the Whitman Ranch, including the ridge access corridor that ran along the northern edge, and it had a county surveyor's stamp in the corner and 2 witness signatures she didn't recognize. But what made her breath stop was what was written in the margin in fresh ink, much more recent than 1881, the ink dark where the rest of the document had faded to gray. Her father's handwriting again from some time in the last year of his life. This is the original. Deeds has a copy, a false one. The line is moved. Compare carefully. The ridge belongs to us. She knelt there in the dirt beside the cedar post in the summer heat, and she held the survey document in both hands, and she looked at it for a long time. Her father had known. He hadn't just suspected Deeds, he'd found proof. He'd found the falsified survey, compared it to his original, and known exactly what was being done to him. And he'd been too sick to fight it himself, so he'd buried the original and left her a note, and trusted that she'd find it. He'd trusted her. She folded the survey carefully, put it in the tin, and put the tin in her satchel next to the receipt. She still didn't know what the brass key opened, but she had a feeling she was going to find out. She was halfway back to the ranch house when she heard hoofbeats on the main track. Not one horse, too. She stopped and waited, one hand going automatically to the satchel. It was Sheriff Clyde Morrison. He was riding with a deputy she'd seen around town but didn't know by name. Young, thin, with the look of someone who followed instructions carefully and didn't ask what they were for. Morrison himself was heavy-set and deliberate, the kind of man who'd been in his position long enough that he'd stopped questioning whether he was doing the job right or just doing what was convenient. He pulled up 20 feet from her and looked down from the saddle. "Morning, May." "Sheriff, heard you had a bit of trouble over at the Rattlesnake yesterday." He said it neutrally, the way you'd say heard it rained east of town. "I went to speak with Harlan Deeds about a business matter." "Uh-huh." He pushed his hat back slightly. "Deeds came by my office yesterday evening. Said you made some threats." She stared at him. "I made a threat." "That's what he said. I told him I'd be at the county assessor's office Monday morning with documentation of a fraudulent deed transfer." She kept her voice level. "If that's a threat, Sheriff, it's the kind you make in a courthouse, not with a gun." Morrison looked at her for a moment. His expression was not unfriendly exactly. It was something worse. It was the expression of a man who'd already decided how this conversation was going to go. Now, May, I understand you've had a hard year. Losing your daddy trying to run this place by yourself, that's a heavy load. Nobody's saying it isn't. He paused. But making accusations against a man like Harlan Deeds without solid ground to stand on, that's the kind of thing that makes a woman look unstable. Makes it hard for people to take her seriously when she comes in with other concerns. The word unstable sat in the air between them. She felt something cold move through her chest despite the heat. She recognized what he was doing, the framing of it, the gentle, regretful tone, the suggestion that her grief made her unreliable. It was a very old move, and it worked on people who didn't see it coming. She saw it coming. "Thank you for your concern, Sheriff," she said. "I'll see you Monday." His expression shifted slightly, something behind his eyes tightening. Deeds also mentioned Jake Callahan was in the saloon. She said nothing. "You want to be careful about the company you keep, May. Callahan's got history in this county that doesn't do anybody favors." He let that sit for a moment. Man like that roughneck range, war's no settled roots. That's not the kind of association that helps a woman trying to establish her claim to a property. "I appreciate the advice," she said. She didn't move. She didn't shift the satchel on her hip. She stood in the dry grass in the summer heat, and she looked up at him, and she kept her voice exactly as polite as it needed to be. "Is there anything else?" A long pause. "Just wanted to check on you," Morrison said. He pulled his hat back down. "Neighbor thing to do." He turned his horse. The deputy followed without a word. She watched them ride back down the track toward the main road, and she stood there until they were out of sight, and then she let herself breathe. Deeds had moved fast, less than 24 hours, which meant she was right, which meant the deed wasn't just a paperwork error, wasn't just Deeds being sloppy or crooked on his own account. You didn't send the sheriff to a woman's ranch the next morning over a paperwork dispute unless someone wanted that dispute contained quickly. She turned and walked back to the ranch house, and she was already thinking about the survey document in her satchel and what it would mean to put it in front of a county assessor who hadn't been bought, and how she was going to figure out which ones those were and whether Monday morning was going to be enough time. She was so deep in it that she almost didn't notice the horse tied to her porch rail. She stopped. It was a buckskin, tall and well kept, with trail dust on its legs and a bedroll tied behind the saddle. A working horse, not a show animal. The kind of horse a man bought to do a job and treated well because he needed it to last. Jake Callahan was sitting on her porch steps. He stood up when she came around the corner of the fence. He had his hat in his hands, and he looked at her with those steady dark eyes, and he waited while she covered the last 20 yards between them. "You could have knocked," she said. "I knocked. Nobody answered." He paused. "I heard Morrison's horse on the road going out." She stopped in front of him. The satchel was heavy on her hip. She looked at him, the scar, the stillness, the way he held himself like a man with no need to explain his presence anywhere. "He came to warn me off," she said. "Called me unstable. Mentioned you specifically." Callahan's jaw moved slightly. Not quite a reaction, more like a confirmation of something he'd already calculated. "How much did you find?" he said. She looked at him. "What makes you think I found something?" "You went out to the north field this morning," he said. "I saw you from the road when I came up the track. You were walking north." He paused. "And Robert Whitman told me 6 years ago when we were settling the water rights that if he ever found himself in real trouble, he'd buried insurance on the property line." He said it like a man who meant it. Another pause. He was that kind of man. She was quiet for a moment. The summer heat pressed down on both of them. "He found the original survey," she said. "He knew Deeds had a false copy. The false copy moves the ridgeline. It removes the access corridor from Whitman land entirely." She opened the satchel and held up the tin. "This is the original, hand-drawn county stamp, 1881 witnesses." Callahan looked at the tin. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, but the way a man's face changes when a thing he suspected turns out to be true, and being right about it gives him no pleasure. "Crestline Holdings," he said. She went still. "You know about them." I've been watching them work for 8 months. His voice was quiet and completely even. They've taken 3 properties in this county since last fall. 2 by purchase below market, both sellers in some kind of financial pressure before the sale. 1 by a deed dispute that resolved in Crestline's favor inside of 3 weeks, which is fast enough that you'd need a judge in your pocket to manage it. Dunmore, she said. He looked at her directly. Your father wrote his name down. He asked a question, Dunmore connection, with a question mark. It's not a question anymore. He said it flatly. Dunmore's been the money behind Crestline since before they filed their first claim in this county. He uses them to acquire land he doesn't want his name on publicly, then folds the properties into his holdings after the transaction's been through enough hands that nobody looks back far enough to find him. He paused. He's been doing it in 3 counties. Nobody's put it together because each county only sees its own piece. She stared at him. How do you know this? Because he tried it on me 2 years ago. He said it without heat. Different county, different company name. I had the paperwork to fight it, and I did. But I lost 6 months and more money than I had easy, and afterward I started paying attention to how he works. He looked at the tin in her hands. That survey document, that's the kind of thing that could stop him, if it goes to the right people. The assessor's office. Not the county assessor, he said. Not here. Morrison's in his pocket, and whoever's running the assessor's office got appointed through the county commissioner's recommendation, which means Dunmore signed off on it. His voice was quiet, but the weight of what he was saying was not. You need to go to the federal land office, territorial surveyor's jurisdiction. They're above the county structure. She was quiet for a moment, taking it in. The federal land office was 2 days' ride, 2 days each way. And between now and then, she had a ranch with no one on it, a deed that didn't legally exist, and a sheriff who'd already paid her a friendly visit. If I leave, she said slowly, the ranch is empty. He looked at her. I know. And deeds or whoever's behind deeds, they'll know I've gone. Yes. So someone needs to be here, she said. She looked at him steadily. That's why you came this morning. He didn't look away. I came because you need a witness when you go to that land office. Someone who's filed federal complaints before and knows how that process works. And yes, because you can't leave this property empty for 4 days while you're doing it. She looked at him for a long time. This was not a man she knew. She'd met him twice, once across a saloon room, without a word exchanged, once on a boardwalk with 30 seconds of conversation. She knew his name because the county talked about him. She knew her father had trusted him. She knew he'd sat in a corner without moving, and somehow emptied a room of its cruelty. She knew he hadn't had to come here this morning. Who watches the ranch while we're gone? She said. I've got 2 hands I trust, he said. Brought them down from the ridge last night when I heard Morrison was making visits. He paused. They'll be here by noon. She looked at him. You thought this through before you came? Yes, ma'am. You were going to offer all of this before you knew about the survey? Yes, ma'am. She was quiet again. She thought about her father's handwriting in the ledger. You'll know what to do. She thought about Morrison's voice, the word unstable delivered with a neighborly smile. She thought about the survey tin in her hands and the brass key she still didn't know the purpose of. She thought about the fact that someone had tried to do to Jake Callahan what they were doing to her, and he hadn't let them, and he was still standing. We leave tomorrow morning, she said. Early. Something moved in his expression, not quite relief, but something in the direction of it. Yes, ma'am, he said. And Callahan. She held his gaze. This is my land. My father's survey, my deed, my fight. You're here to help, not to carry it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once with a kind of simple seriousness that told her he understood exactly what she meant. Wouldn't have it any other way, he said. She turned and went up the porch steps and pushed open the door to the ranch house. She put the tin on the kitchen table and sat down across from it and looked at it. Outside, she heard Callahan settle back down on the porch steps, not leaving, not intruding. Just present the way a man is present when he's decided something matters, and he intends to be useful about it. She thought about the brass key. She pulled it out of the tin and held it up. Small, plain, the kind of key that fit a lockbox rather than a door. Her father's handwriting on the note hadn't mentioned it specifically, just said, "You'll know what to do." She hadn't known yet. She still didn't quite. But she had a feeling it mattered. The kind of feeling her father had trusted all his life, that careful instinct that said, "This is important, pay attention." The feeling she'd inherited whether she'd wanted to or not. She set the key on the table next to the tin, and the survey document, and the receipt. 3 pieces of something larger. She needed to find the rest of it before Monday. Before whoever was watching this ranch figured out that she'd been out to the north fence line. Before Dunmore, because it was Dunmore, her father had known it, and Callahan knew it, and now she knew it before he decided that the friendly sheriff's visit hadn't been enough. She got up and started going through her father's papers again. More carefully this time. She knew what she was looking for now. She was looking for whatever that key opened and what was inside it, and whether it was going to be enough to take down a man who had been doing this for 30 years across 3 counties without anyone stopping him. Outside, the summer heat pressed on. The ranch was quiet. On the porch, Jake Callahan sat still and watched the road. She found the lockbox at 2 in the morning. She hadn't meant to be awake that late. She'd told herself she'd go through the papers for another hour and then sleep, because the ride to the federal land office was 2 days, and she needed to be sharp for it. But the papers kept pulling her forward, one document leading to the next. Her father's filing system, revealing itself slowly, like a language she was learning in real time. And then she moved the winter blankets off the top shelf of the bedroom closet to reach a stack of ledgers behind them, and something shifted and fell, and she caught it before it hit the floor. A lockbox. Flat metal the size of a Bible. Heavier than it looked. She already knew the key would fit before she tried it. She could feel it the way you feel the end of a thing coming, that gathering weight, that sense of arrival. The key turned. The lid opened. Inside was a journal. Her father's handwriting, but not his ranch ledger. Smaller, tighter, written like a man who knew he was putting something dangerous on paper and wanted it dense enough that a casual reader would lose patience before they found the important parts. Dated entries going back 14 months. Names, dates, transactions. Property parcel numbers cross-referenced with county filing dates. Amounts paid. Amounts received. The careful, methodical record of a sick man who had figured out what was being done to him and had documented every piece of it that he could reach. On the last page, in writing that shook slightly with the effort it had cost him, her father had written for May. "I'm sorry I couldn't finish it. You're stronger than I ever was. Finish it." She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, put the journal in the satchel with the survey and the receipt, and went to get a few hours of sleep. She was on the porch with coffee before the sun cleared the ridge. Callahan was already up. She could see the orange point of light from a match near the fence line. The brief flare of it, and then he was walking toward the house with his hat on, and his boots dusty, and the unhurried stride of a man who'd been awake for a while. She held out the second cup without saying anything. He took it. He looked at her face in the early light, and she watched him read what was there. The sleeplessness, the redness around her eyes. She hadn't been able to do much about the set of her jaw that she'd been working on since 2 in the morning. He didn't say anything about any of it. He drank the coffee. "I found the lockbox," she said. "What was in it?" "A journal. 14 months of documentation. Names, amounts, parcel numbers." He cross-referenced everything. She paused. "It's enough. If we get it to the right people, it's enough." Callahan was quiet for a moment. He looked out toward the road. "Then we need to move before they figure out you have it. Your hands are coming at noon." "I moved it up. They'll be here within the hour." He glanced at her. "I sent word last night after Morrison left." She looked at him. He had anticipated this. He'd anticipated it before she'd found the journal, before she'd confirmed what the lockbox contained. He'd moved his people closer because he'd already calculated that if her father was the kind of man who buried surveys at fence posts, there was likely something more, and something more meant the risk level went up overnight. "You're good at this," she said. "Spent 2 years learning how Dunmore operates," he said. That's enough time to get good at something." She nodded. She went inside and brought out her coat and the satchel and checked the buckle on it twice. When she came back out, Callahan had finished the coffee and was looking down the road with an expression she was starting to recognize, not alarm, but that particular quality of attention that meant he was running calculations that hadn't finished yet. "What?" she said. "Deeds new within a day," he said. "Morrison came out within a day. They're moving fast." "I noticed. Which means they already knew your father had something." He turned to look at her. They didn't know exactly what or where, but they knew he'd found the survey discrepancy. That's why the deed transfer disappeared. They needed you off the property before you could look for what he'd hidden. He paused. "You being in that saloon yesterday, coming at deeds directly, that was faster than they expected. They thought you'd spend another month or two just trying to figure out why the assessor's records were wrong." May thought about that. Her father had bought her time by dying with his secrets intact. The thought was so sharp it took her breath for a moment. She put the satchel over her shoulder. "Then let's not waste what he bought us." They were on the road by the time the sun was fully up. Callahan's two hands, a quiet older man named Royce and a younger one named Ellis, who looked like he'd been in at least 2 serious fights and one, both arriving at the ranch just as they were leaving. Royce had a rifle across his saddle. Ellis had too. She didn't ask where they'd come from or what Callahan had told them. She just noted that they both looked at the road in both directions before they dismounted, and she felt something in her chest loosen slightly at that. The first day of riding was hard. Not the miles she'd done longer in summer before, but the weight of what she was carrying, not in the satchel, but in her head. She went over the journal in her memory while she rode the entries her father had made, trying to build the full picture. Crestline Holdings, 5 properties, 4 in this county, 1 across the territorial line. Dunmore's name appeared only twice in the journal. Directly her father had been careful, had documented actions rather than attributors where he couldn't prove the connection. But the parcel numbers tied to Crestline's acquisitions matched exactly with land that sat along the same ridge access corridor as the Whitman spread, and the timing of the acquisitions tracked precisely with Dunmore's movements to expand his summer grazing range. He was building a wall. That was what it was. A line of controlled properties along the ridge that would give him exclusive access to the North Plateau. Grazing close off competing ranchers forced them to pay his terms for passage or just wait until the financial pressure drove them to sell. Her father's ranch was the last piece. Callahan rode mostly quiet beside her. He spoke when he had something to say and didn't fill silence with words to replace it, which she appreciated. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, when the heat was at its worst and both horses were moving slower, and she was thinking about water and the next creek crossing, he said, "There's something you should know about the Federal Land Office." She looked at him. "The supervising agent there is a man named Garrett Holt. I've dealt with him before on my own complaint 2 years ago. He's honest, genuinely, not just functionally. But he's careful. He's not going to move on a complaint against a man like Dunmore based on a survey document and a personal journal, even a detailed one. He'll need corroboration, something outside your family's direct interest." She thought about that. What kind of corroboration? Other claimants? Other people who've been through what you've been through and can say so on record? He paused. The 2 families who sold under pressure, I don't know if either of them understood what was being done to them. If one of them did, if they'd be willing to make a statement. The Brower family sold 8 months ago, she said. It came out before she thought about it. She'd heard it in town, filed it away as sad news. Old Carl Brower, whose wife was ill, who'd been behind on his taxes, who'd taken a price everyone thought was low, but nobody questioned, because a sick wife and back taxes explained a lot. Callahan looked at her. "You knew them. My father did. Carl Brower and my father went back 20 years. He came to my father's funeral." She paused. "He cried. He was one of 3 men who cried." A moment of silence. "Then he might talk to you," Callahan said quietly. "He might talk to you in a way he wouldn't talk to a stranger." She looked at the road ahead. Carl Brower lived 30 miles south of the route they were riding. 30 miles south was a day's additional travel minimum. We'd miss the Monday window at the land office, she said. Holt's there Tuesday through Thursday. Monday's his admin day. He doesn't take complaints on Mondays. He paused. I should have told you that before we left. She looked at him sideways. His expression was even. I thought we might need Brower. I wasn't sure until you mentioned the journal. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked forward again. You could have just said we needed to go to Brower's first. You might have said no. Then I'd have had to argue for it, and we'd have lost time arguing. She thought about that. She thought about whether she was annoyed by it. She decided she wasn't quite. It was the decision of a man who'd thought further down the road than she had, and who'd judged correctly that showing her the path was more efficient than explaining it. She didn't love being managed, but she recognized good thinking when she saw it. Next time, she said, just tell me. Yes, ma'am, he said, and she believed him. They turned south. Carl Brower's place was smaller than she remembered from childhood visits with her father, though maybe it had always been this small, and she'd just been young enough then that everything looked larger. He came out onto the porch when he heard the horses, and he stood there squinting into the late afternoon light, and when he recognized her, his face did something complicated and old and tired. May Whitman, he said. Lord Almighty, you look like your daddy. She got down from her horse. Mr. Brower. He looked at Callahan without warmth. Who's this? Jake Callahan. He's helping me. A pause. Brower looked at Callahan the way old men look at things they're deciding whether to trust, slow, thorough, biased toward skepticism. Heard of you, Brower said finally. Ridge Country. Yes, sir. Another pause. Come inside, Brower said. It's too hot to talk on a porch. Inside over coffee, that was stronger than hers, and a silence that Brower maintained while he decided what he was willing to say, May put the survey document on his table. She put the receipt next to it. She put 3 pages of the journal, the ones with Crestline Holdings referenced directly next to that. Brower looked at them for a long time. Your daddy put this together, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. His jaw moved. He was a tall man who'd gotten thin in the way old men got thin when the weight of something pressed on them long enough, not sick thin, but worn thin, the kind that happened to people carrying something they shouldn't have to carry alone. They told me the tax filing was irregular, he said slowly. Told me the county had flagged it, that there'd be a lien that I'd have to pay penalties on top of what I already owed. And Marta was... He stopped. He picked up his coffee cup and put it down. She needed the specialist in Denver. I didn't have time to fight a lien. I needed the money from the sale fast. The tax filing wasn't irregular, May said quietly. He looked at her. The irregularity was manufactured, same as my deed transfer. They create a pressure point, they time it for when you're vulnerable, and then they offer you a way out that happens to be their price. She paused. My father documented it. 3 families, the same pattern. Brower's hands had gone still on the table. Marta's better, he said. The non sequitur sat there for a moment. Before May understood it, he was telling her the thing that justified the decision he'd made, the decision he'd been living with. I did it for Marta. She's better. It was worth it. I'm glad, May said. And she meant it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the documents on the table. What do you need from me? A statement. Written, signed, dated. What you were told about the tax irregularity, who told you the timeline of the sale. She paused. You don't have to go to the land office yourself if you can't make the ride. A sworn statement witnessed by someone reliable. I'll go, he said. She looked at him. I'll ride up with you, he said. He said it the way a man says something he's been waiting to say for 8 months without knowing what it was waiting for. Marta's sister is with her this week. I can make the ride. He looked at Callahan. How long to the federal office from here? Day and a half at a reasonable pace, Callahan said. Brower nodded. I'll be saddled at first light. I'll say. That night, sleeping on Brower's floor with her coat for a pillow, May lay awake again, but differently than the night before. Not counting creaks. not running through documents, just holding the weight of what was accumulating around her. The survey, the journal, the receipt, and now Carl Brower, who had lost his land and his 20 years, and was willing to ride a day and a half at his age to say so on record, because the right person had put the truth in front of him and given it back its shape. Her father had done this. This web of careful documentation, this buried trail he'd built it so that she'd have something to carry forward, and she was carrying it, and now it was gathering other people to it, the way moving water gathered things. She thought about Jake Callahan on his bedroll near the door. She thought about the way he'd said "I'll go" before she could finish her sentence about the land office, the way he'd moved his people to the ranch before he had proof she needed it, the way he sat in corners with sight lines to every door. She thought about what a man had to be, what he had to have survived, what he had to have decided about himself, to be still and steady in the ways that Callahan was still and steady. She wasn't ready to think about that directly yet. But she was aware of it the way you're aware of weather coming, not the storm itself, just the change in the air. She slept. They reached the town of Millhaven, where the federal land office sat on the second floor of a building that also housed a land surveyor and a notary in the late afternoon of the following day. Carl Brower had ridden the whole distance without complaint, which told her more about what he'd been carrying than anything he'd said. Agent Garrett Holt was a compact man in his 50s, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and the expression of someone who had spent 20 years separating genuine complaints from time-wasting ones and had gotten very efficient at the process. He looked at May, then at Callahan, then at Brower, and then at the satchel. "Sit down," he said. She laid everything on his desk in order, the receipt first, then the original survey with her father's margin notes, then the 3 journal pages. Then, while Holt was reading, Brower put his own account on the table, a written statement he'd composed the previous evening at his kitchen table, witnessed by his wife's sister, who had legal training from before she married. Holt read in silence. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes and put them back on and read again. He picked up the survey document and held it at an angle to the window light. He said, "This margin notation is recent. Last year, roughly." "Between February and March of this year," May said. "My father died in March." Holt set the document down carefully. "Crestline Holdings." He said not to any of them in particular. He said it like a man placing a stone in a pattern he'd been building for a while. May went very still. "You know that name," she said. Holt looked at her over his glasses. "I know that name," he said. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a folder. It was thick, substantial, the kind of file that had been accumulating for a while. He put it on top of the documents she'd laid out. "Complaint filed out of Harmon County 8 months ago. Land dispute deed irregularity, surveying discrepancy." He opened the folder. The complainant withdrew the filing 6 months ago. No explanation given. Callahan's voice was very quiet. "Who was the complainant?" Holt looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at May. "A rancher named Braddock," he said. "Thomas Braddock, spread in Harmon County, North Ridge." May looked at Callahan. She watched him absorb the name and saw the moment it connected to something he knew. "Braddock's dead," Callahan said. "Riding accident, 4 months ago." The room went quiet. Holt took off his glasses. He didn't put them back on. "That's the 3rd riding accident connected to a Crestline Holdings land dispute in the last 2 years, he said. He said it slowly, like he was counting, like he'd been counting for a while and the number had just changed. May heard the words land and felt the floor of the situation shift under her, the way a creek bank shifts when the water rises, not collapse but change the solid thing, becoming something else. This wasn't just a deed dispute. This wasn't just land fraud. Someone who'd tried to fight Crestline Holdings had withdrawn his complaint, and 4 months later, he was dead, and Garrett Holt had just said, "That's the 3rd." She looked at the satchel in her lap. She thought about her ranch 6 miles outside Red Creek, with Royce and Ellis watching the road. She thought about Morrison's visit, the word unstable, the careful neighborly smile. She thought about Harlan Deeds's soft hands, and the way he'd looked at her on the saloon floor. She thought about the fact that she had ridden 2 days to get here, and the people who wanted her land knew she was gone, and knew what she'd found. And if any of them were the kind of people who arranged riding accidents for complainants who got too close. "I need to send a wire," she said. Holt was already reaching for his pen. "I have a telegraph office downstairs," he said. But first, he looked at her directly with the specific weight of a man about to say something he needed her to hear completely. "I want you to understand what you've brought me. This journal, this survey, this statement." He nodded at Brower. "This is more than I've had on Crestline in 8 months of watching them work. This is enough to open a federal investigation." He paused. "But once I file that, it moves. It moves publicly, and there are people who will know within days that the complaint is active and who filed it. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" May looked at him. "I understand," she said. "File it." Holt held her gaze for a moment. He nodded once. He picked up his pen. Callahan's hand was very briefly on her arm, not grabbing, not restraining, just present for a second, the way you touch a wall to steady yourself in the dark. She felt it through her coat sleeve, and then it was gone. Outside the window, the sun was dropping behind the western hills, and somewhere back along the road they'd ridden in Red Creek, the Rattlesnake Saloon would be filling up with the evening crowd, and Harlan Deeds would be sitting at his back table, and Calhoun Dunmore would be at his ranch receiving whatever reports his people sent him. She thought about her father writing in a shaking hand. "Finish it." Holt's pen moved across the paper. She sat straight and watched him write, and she did not look away. The wire May sent from Millhaven was 12 words long. "Stay on the property. Trust no one who comes without Callahan's word. May." She handed the telegraph operator the paper and watched him tap it out, and thought about Royce and Ellis on her porch rifles across their laps, watching a road that might now have different traffic on it than it had yesterday. She'd been gone 2 days. 2 days was enough time for a lot of things to happen in a county where the sheriff owed his position to the wrong man. She went back upstairs. Holt had the journal open on his desk, working through the entries with the careful attention of a man who read documents the way surgeons read wounds, looking for the thing underneath the thing, the structure beneath the surface. Callahan was standing near the window. Brower had his written statement in front of him and was adding a postscript in his slow, deliberate handwriting, something he'd thought of on the walk back from the telegraph office. "The Braddock complaint," May said, sitting back down. "You said he withdrew it 6 months ago. Did he give any reason? Any contact after the withdrawal?" Holt looked up. "A letter. Said he'd resolved the matter privately and no longer required federal assistance." He paused. The handwriting was his. "I checked it against the original filing." "But you didn't believe it," Callahan said from the window. Holt looked at him. "I believed the handwriting. I didn't believe a man who'd spent 4 months building a federal complaint resolved it privately in 10 days without explanation." He took his glasses off. "But I had no grounds to pursue it. A complainant has the right to withdraw. I filed the withdrawal and kept the original complaint in the drawer and waited." "And 4 months later he was dead," May said. "Riding accident," Holt said. The way he said it made clear what he thought of that. May looked at the journal on his desk. Her father's careful handwriting. 14 months of a sick man doing the work that healthy men should have been doing, building the record that no one else was willing to build, leaving it for his daughter because there was no one else he could trust it with. "How long before the federal investigation is visible?" she asked. "How long before Dunmore's people know it's active?" Holt was quiet for a moment. "I'll file the opening complaint tonight by telegraph to the territorial office. They'll assign an investigator. That process takes 3 to 5 days before anything is visible in the county records." He paused. "But Dunmore has people in the territorial office. Not senior people, someone in the clerical structure most likely. Probably 7 to 10 days before it reaches him through those channels." 7 to 10 days, she repeated. "If we're lucky." Holt folded his hands on the desk. "The risk is that his people in Red Creek report unusual activity before that. Your absence from the ranch, your visit here, those things may already be in motion." She looked at Callahan. He was looking back at her with that steady, calculated attention. "We need to move fast," she said. "We need to do something else first," he said. She waited. "Dunmore needs to not know we've been here." He pushed off from the wall and came to the desk. "Not yet. 7 to 10 days is enough time to do real damage at the county level, enough time for him to file counter-documentation, pressure witnesses, make Brower's statement look unreliable. He's done it before. He'll know exactly how to slow a federal investigation down if he knows it's coming." He looked at Holt. "Is there a way to file the complaint under seal? Keep the complainant's name out of the accessible record until the investigator is on the ground here." Holt thought about it. "There's a provision for sealed complaints when there's credible threat to the complainant. I'd need to state the grounds." "Thomas Braddock," Callahan said simply. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen again. "That'll work," he said. The sealed filing took another hour. By the time they walked out of the federal land office, the sun was gone, and Millhaven was settling into its evening quiet, oil lamps coming on in windows, the particular hush of a small town at the end of its workday. Brower shook May's hand on the street outside, held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, and looked at her with eyes that had something in them she recognized the specific relief of a man who'd been carrying something alone and had finally been able to put part of it down. "Your daddy would be something," he said. He couldn't finish the sentence, but she understood it. "Thank you, Mr. Brower," she said. "Go home to Marta." He nodded. He shook Callahan's hand without the reservation he'd shown at first. Then he walked down the street toward the livery where his horse was boarded, a tall old man moving carefully, and May watched him go. "He could still be in danger," she said quietly. "I know." Callahan was already thinking it. "His statement is in the sealed file. Dunmore can't target what he can't see, but if anyone in Red Creek reports back that Brower rode north with us, then we need to get back before that report does." Yes. They rode through the first part of the night, trading the comfort of an inn for distance, stopping only when the horses needed it. The moon was up, and the road was clear enough to travel by, and May rode with the satchel across her body, and her father's journal against her ribs, and the specific focused energy of someone who had stopped being afraid and started being operational. Somewhere past midnight, Callahan said, "Tell me about your father." She glanced at him. The question surprised her. Not the content of it, but the timing. The quiet way it came out of the darkness between them, like something he'd been holding for a while and decided to release. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to say." She thought about that. She thought about the 12 years she'd run the ranch alongside him, the particular way he'd taught her things, not by explaining but by doing, expecting her to watch and follow and ask when she got stuck. The way he'd argued with her when she was right and admitted it after. The way he'd cried at her mother's funeral and not apologized for it. He wasn't easy, she said. He was fair, but he wasn't easy. He expected things. She paused. He expected me to be capable. He never once suggested I couldn't do something because I was a woman, which sounds like a small thing, until you've met enough men who would have. Callahan was quiet. He was sick for almost 2 years before he died, she said. He didn't tell me for the first 8 months, just kept doing the work, kept running the ranch, kept filing papers and writing in that journal. She looked at the dark road ahead. I found out from the doctor. My father was furious. He said he hadn't told me because he didn't want me to manage him. He wanted me to keep seeing him as himself. A pause. He was himself until the last week, she said. That's rare. I know it's rare. Another silence. Then Callahan said, My father died when I was 19. Fever. 3 days from fine to gone. He paused. I had the ranch and a younger brother and no idea what I was doing. She looked at him. He was looking at the road. What did you do? She said. Made mistakes. Fixed them. Made different ones. A brief pause. Learned that a man who won't ask for help when he needs it isn't strong. He's just expensive. She thought about that. She turned it over. Is that what you're doing now? She said. Helping because you needed it once and someone did? He was quiet for a moment. Partly. What's the other part? He didn't answer immediately. She let it sit. She was learning that with Callahan, silence wasn't evasion. It was just the space a thought needed before it became words. "Your father dealt straight with me when he didn't have to," he said finally. "And you got off that saloon floor without making a sound. And what's being done to your family is wrong in a way that I know how to help fix." He paused. "Those are 3 parts." She looked at the dark road. She felt something shift in her chest. Quiet, specific, the kind of shift that you notice but don't name yet. "3 parts," she said. "Yes, ma'am." They reached the road to Red Creek in the early morning hours, and May felt the particular tension of returning to a place that might have changed in your absence, the way a soldier feels coming back to a position they left to get ammunition. She'd been gone 3 days. 3 days in which Morrison had visited, in which deeds had moved fast, in which Dunmore's operation, whatever shape it was taking now, had been running without her watching it. She saw the smoke before she saw the ranch. Not the chimney smoke of a morning fire. The low pale haze of something that had burned recently and gone cold, hanging over the tree line to the north like a stain. She pushed Henry faster without thinking about it, and Callahan was already moving alongside her, and they came up the track to the ranch at a gallop and pulled up in front of a building that was still standing. She registered that first, the walls still up, the roof still on, but the barn had not been as lucky. What was left of the barn was a framework. The horses were gone. Royce was sitting on the porch steps with a rag wrapped around his forearm and the expression of a man who had been awake for a very long time and was somewhere past angry into something quieter and harder. May was off her horse before it fully stopped. "Where's Ellis?" "Inside. He's all right, took a knock on the head, but he's up." Royce looked at her steadily. 3 men came at 2 in the morning. Didn't announce themselves. Ellis heard them at the barn first. He went out, they hit him. We traded shots in the dark. They got the horses and put a torch to the barn and rode south before we could get organized." He paused. "Nobody was killed. I don't know if that was luck or intention." May stood there looking at the burned barn. 3 days ago, she'd been on a saloon floor. 2 days ago, she'd found her father's lockbox. Last night, she'd sat in a federal land office and watched an agent write her complaint into the sealed record. And now, someone had burned her barn and taken her horses and hit Ellis on the head and left Royce with a wrapped arm, and the summer morning was getting hot already and the smoke smell was still in the air. She turned to Callahan. His jaw was set. He was looking at the track going south, the direction the men had ridden. "They wanted the horses," she said. "Not the house. They could have burned the house." "Yes," he said. "They want me unable to move, not dead." She thought it through. "If I'm dead, there's an inquiry. If I'm just stuck here without horses, without easy transport, they slow you down while they work the counterfiling," Callahan finished. "Get their own documentation in front of the county recorder before you can respond." He looked at her. "The sealed filing in Millhaven is protected. But there's nothing stopping Dunmore from filing a competing deed claim at the county level in the next few days, establishing his documentation as prior record. And then when the federal investigation surfaces, it looks like a dispute between 2 claims, not a fraud," May said. "Right." She looked at the burned barn. She thought about timing. 7 to 10 days before Dunmore's people in the territorial office saw the federal complaint. 3 to 5 days before the investigator was assigned. She needed those days to hold, needed nothing to happen at the county level that muddied the record her father had spent 14 months building. "I need to get to the county recorder's office," she said. "Today. Before Deeds or anyone connected to him files anything." "With what?" Royce said, not unkindly. "They took the horses." "Mine's still here," Callahan said. "And I'll get yours back." He said that second part with a quietness that was more alarming than volume. "Royce Ellis, can you ride?" "I can ride," Royce said. He looked at his wrapped arm. "Not fast, but I can ride. Borrow horses from Brower's neighbor. The Hendersons run stock. They'll loan short-term if you explain. Get them back here." He looked at May. "I'll take you to Red Creek on my horse double. It's 6 miles. She looked at him. "That's a working horse, not a, he'll manage 6 miles with 2 riders." He met her eyes. "We go now. We get to the recorder's office before it opens. We're first in the door." He paused. "Or we wait for horses and we lose the morning." She turned to Royce. "Ellis, is his head clear?" "Clearer than mine right now." "Tell him what happened. Tell him to write it down, everything he remembers, names if he got any descriptions. Date it and sign it." She picked up the satchel, which she'd never let off her body the whole ride home. "When Callahan gets your horses back, I want Ellis to ride that account to the Millhaven telegraph office and wire it to Agent Holt directly." Royce looked at her with the particular expression of a man recalibrating his assessment of someone. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She and Callahan were on his buckskin and moving within 4 minutes. 6 miles had never felt shorter or longer at the same time. She was behind him on the saddle, one hand on the satchel, aware of his back in front of her, and the horse's steady movement, and the fact that every minute on this road was a minute. Deeds might already be at the recorder's office a minute. Dunmore's machinery might already be turning. "Morrison's going to be a problem," she said to the back of his shoulder. "Morrison's going to be a specific problem," he said. "If he's in the recorder's office when we get there." "What do we do if he is?" "We file anyway. He can't stop a filing. He's a sheriff, not a judge." He paused. "But he can make it slow. He can ask questions, require additional documentation, delay the clerk a dozen small things that cost time. Then we need someone in that office who isn't Morrison." "Who do you trust in this county?" he asked. She thought fast. "The recorder's clerk. Young woman named Patricia Owens. She was a friend of my mother's daughter. She's not connected to Dunmore that I know of. She's only been in that office 8 months." 8 months, he said. "When did Crestline start working this county?" She went still. 8 months ago, she said. "So she was hired right as the operation started. Might be coincidence." "Might be," she said. "But she came to my father's funeral too. She stayed after most people left. She told me if I needed anything to come find her." She paused. "People who are planted don't say things like that, they stay forgettable." "Then we go to her directly," he said. "Not the front counter. Her." Red Creek was coming up on the horizon. The morning was full up now, the heat already building the town, moving into its workday routine. She could see the main street from the road. The early traffic, a wagon going north, 2 men talking outside the feed store. She could also see the sheriff's office, and outside it, Morrison's horse was tied to the rail. He was already up, already moving. "He knows we're back," she said. "Or he's running his regular morning." Callahan kept his voice even. "Don't assume. Move fast and let him catch up if he's going to." They came into town at a trot and went straight to the county recorder's building, which shared a block with the assessor's office and the land survey office, a row of county administration tucked behind the main commercial street. Callahan stopped the horse at the rail, and she was down before he'd fully pulled up the satchel, already open, moving toward the door. Patricia Owens was at her desk when May walked in. 26 neat, with the careful precision of someone who'd taught herself to be useful in an environment that wasn't always friendly to women who were useful. She looked up when May came in, and something shifted in her expression, not surprise, but a kind of quiet alertness. The look of someone who'd been half expecting this moment. "May Whitman," she said. "Patricia." May came straight to the desk, not the counter. "I need to file a deed correction and an original survey registration. Today. Right now, before the office formally opens." Patricia looked at the door, then at May. Then at Callahan, who had come in behind and positioned himself near the front window without being asked. "Harlan Deeds came in yesterday afternoon," Patricia said quietly. "He filed a competing deed claim on the Whitman property. Said the original transfer was never properly executed." May's stomach clenched. "He's already filed. Yesterday at 4 o'clock. Patricia's voice was careful and low. "He had 2 witnesses and a notarized statement. I processed it because I had to. It was a legal filing." She paused. "But, May, he made an error. His filing references the survey document as evidence, but the survey number he cited is registered to a different parcel. I noticed it when I was cross-referencing. I flagged it internally, but I haven't corrected the reference yet." May stared at her. Patricia held her gaze steadily. "I haven't had time to correct it yet," she repeated with a precision that was not at all about time. She understood. Patricia had found the discrepancy and left it uncorrected, left the door open, waited. "Show me what I need to file," May said. Patricia was already reaching for the forms. They worked fast, Patricia pulling forms, May filling them out with the original survey document in front of her, the receipt, the specific parcel numbers her father had recorded in the journal. Callahan stood at the window and watched the street. Nobody came to the door for 7 minutes. On the 8th minute, the door opened. It was not Morrison. It was Harlan Deeds. He looked at May at the desk, at the documents spread in front of her, at Patricia's carefully neutral face, and the blood came up in his face so fast she could see it happen. "What is this?" he said. "A filing," May said. She did not look up from the form she was completing. "You can't." He took a step toward the desk. "That property is under a competing claim. You can't file a correction, while a competing claim is—" "The competing claim has an incorrect survey reference," Patricia said from behind the desk. Her voice was completely professional, completely calm, the voice of a woman who had decided exactly where she stood. "Until that reference is corrected, it's a provisional filing. The correction can be made alongside a competing registration." Deeds stared at her. "You little Mr. Deeds." Callahan's voice came from the window. Quiet. Even. Deeds turned. Callahan was looking at him with those dark, steady eyes. He hadn't moved from the window. He didn't need to. The room went the same quality of silent that the saloon had gone 3 days ago. The same gathering stillness, the same rearrangement of the air around one man's attention. Deeds's mouth opened and closed. "She's filing a legal document," Callahan said. "You can wait outside or you can wait in the street. Either way, you're going to wait. 3 seconds. 5. Deeds looked at May, at Callahan, at Patricia, at the documents on the desk, at the survey document, the original one with the county stamp, and the margin notes and the witness signatures that his falsified copy didn't have and couldn't replicate. She watched him understand what he was looking at. She watched him understand that it was too late. He turned and walked out. The door swung behind him. Patricia let out a breath so controlled it was barely visible. May signed the last form. "Witnessed and stamped," May said. "Witnessed and stamped." Patricia confirmed. She picked up the forms, aligned them precisely, brought the notary stamp down on the registration with the specific finality of someone who had been waiting to do exactly this. Outside, she heard hoofbeats, fast ones heading away from the building. Deeds going to find Morrison, going to find whoever he reported to, going to make his report. She looked at Callahan. He was watching the window, tracking the sound of the retreating horse, with those measuring eyes, running something through his head. "How long do we have?" she said. He looked at her. "Before Morrison comes, 20 minutes. And before Dunmore hears tonight." He said it without softening it. "He'll hear tonight." She picked up the satchel. She looked at the registered filing now in Patricia's hands, her deed, her survey, her father's work, legally entered into the county record with a timestamp that predated anything Dunmore's people could now produce. It was done. That part was done. She looked at Patricia Owens, who was filing the document with the steady efficiency of someone who had chosen a side and was not going to explain it, or excuse it, or make it smaller than it was. "Thank you," May said. Patricia looked at her directly. "Your mother was kind to me when I was young," she said simply. "And what they're doing is wrong. 2 reasons, clean and complete." May nodded. She turned to go. "May." Patricia's voice stopped her at the door. She turned. Patricia was holding a small envelope. "This came to the office yesterday, addressed to the County Recorder General. No return address." She held it out. "I didn't open it, but the postmark is from Harmon County, where Thomas Braddock had filed and withdrawn his complaint." where Thomas Braddock had died 4 months ago in a riding accident. She took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwriting she didn't recognize. But the content dates names a property parcel number, and at the bottom a description of a meeting between Harlan Deeds and a county official from Harmon County in which a sum of money changed hands for the withdrawal of a federal complaint. Signed at the bottom, Ruth Braddock, widow of Thomas. May read it twice. She stood in the doorway of the county recorder's office in Red Creek, with the morning heat pressing in and the sound of the town going about its business outside, and she held a dead man's wife's testimony in her hands, and she felt the weight of it, not as victory, not yet, but as something larger than herself, something that had been moving toward this point for longer than she'd known, gathering force, the way water gathers in a dry season, and then, when it finally runs all at once. She looked at Callahan. He read her expression and held out his hand. She gave him the letter. He read it. Once. He folded it carefully and held it. Ruth Braddock took a risk sending this, he said. She's been waiting, May said. She's been waiting for someone to file. He looked at her. Something in his expression, the careful steadiness of it, the thing she was learning to read as its own language, shifted just slightly. Not softened exactly. Opened. Your father started this, he said. You carried it. Brower added to it. Now Braddock's widow. He paused. This is bigger than Dunmore was counting on. She took the letter back from him. She put it in the satchel with everything else, the receipt, the survey, the journal, the sealed filing number from Millhaven, and now this. Outside somewhere down the main street of Red Creek, she heard Morrison's horse. 20 minutes was optimistic, Callahan said. Yes, it was, she said. She straightened the satchel on her hip and turned to face the door. Morrison came through the door like a man who'd already decided how the conversation was going to go. He had his deputy behind him, the thin, careful one who followed instructions, and he had the particular energy of someone who'd received bad news and was redirecting it outward. He looked at May, at Callahan, at the desk where Patricia was sitting with her hands folded and her expression professionally empty, and he pulled himself up to his full height and said, May Whitman, I'm going to need you to come with me. May didn't move. On what grounds? Interference with a legal county filing. Deeds says you... Deeds filed a document with an incorrect survey reference, Patricia said from behind the desk. Her voice was the same careful professional calm it had been when Deeds was in the room. Ms. Whitman filed a correction and an original survey registration. Both are legal actions. Both are now time-stamped in the county record. She paused. If you have a legal objection to either filing, Sheriff, you're welcome to bring it to the county judge. Morrison looked at her the way men looked at women who said things they hadn't expected and didn't like. Nobody asked you, Miss Owens. Nobody had to, Patricia said. It's my office. Morrison's jaw tightened. He turned back to May. Callahan. He said the name like an accusation. I told you she needed to watch her associations. You told her I had history in this county, Callahan said from the window. He still hadn't moved from it. That's true. I filed a federal land complaint 2 years ago against a Crestline Holdings property acquisition in an adjacent county. I won. He paused. That's my history. Something flickered in Morrison's eyes. Fast and gone. But May caught it, the specific look of a man recalculating, finding a number he didn't expect. Crestline Holdings, Morrison said. He said it carefully, like a man testing weight on a floorboard. Agent Garrett Holt, Federal Land Office, Millhaven, Callahan said. He's got a sealed complaint with that name in it as of 2 days ago. I expect his investigator will be in Red Creek inside the week. He paused. That's also my history in this county, Sheriff. All of it laid out plain. The room held its breath. Morrison stood in the middle of it, and May watched him work through what he'd just been handed. He was not a stupid man. That was the thing about Morrison that made him more dangerous than Deeds. Deeds was greedy and small. Morrison was functional and self-preserving, which meant he was capable of reading a situation and adjusting, capable of recognizing when the weight of something had shifted past the point where his position could hold it. She watched him read this situation. She watched him recognize the sealed federal complaint, the time-stamped county, filing the widow's letter she still had in her satchel, the original survey with the county stamp, the journal with 14 months of her dead father's documentation, all of it stacked and moving, and already past the point where a sheriff in a small county could contain it. She watched him make a decision. "I'll need a copy of that filing number," he said to Patricia. His voice had changed, not friendly, not cooperative, but careful. The voice of a man putting distance between himself and something. "Of course," Patricia said. She wrote it out without hurrying. Morrison took the paper. He looked at May one more time, not the neighborly concern of his ranch visit, not the implicit threat of the word unstable, just a long, flat look that was almost an acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked out. His deputy followed. May let herself breathe. "He's going to wire someone," Callahan said. He was already at the window watching the street. "Not done more directly, he'll want insulation, but someone in the chain." "Let him," May said. Callahan looked at her. "The filing's done. Ruth Braddock's letter is in my satchel. The federal complaint is sealed in Millhaven. Morrison wiring his contacts doesn't change any of those things." She paused. "What does Dunmore do when he realizes the record is already built against him?" Callahan was quiet for a moment. "He tries to discredit the record, or he runs." "Which is he?" Another pause. "In my experience, neither immediately. First, he sends someone to talk." She looked at him. "Someone to offer a price." "Yes, ma'am." She picked up the satchel. She thought about her burned barn. She thought about the horses taken in the dark, and Ellis with a knock on his head, and Royce with a wrapped arm. She thought about a price. "Then let him send someone," she said. "I'll be at the ranch." They rode back on borrowed horses. Patricia had a cousin at the livery who arranged it without questions, which told May something about how Patricia had been living in this county for 8 months, building her own small network of trustworthy people, quietly, and without announcement. She filed that away. The ranch looked worse in full daylight than it had in the shock of early morning. The barn frame was black and skeletal against the summer sky, and the smell of cold smoke sat on everything. Ellis was on the porch upright, a bandage around his head, and the written account of the night in his hand. He handed it to May without preamble. She read it. 3 men. Horses. Dark clothing, faces covered. They'd come from the south and left south. Ellis had gotten a partial on one horse, a distinctive gray with a white left sock. Not much, but something. "Royce get the horses from the Hendersons?" Callahan asked. 2 hours ago, Ellis said. "He's resting." "Tell him to rest more." Callahan looked at the barn frame, then at Ellis. "You up to riding to Millhaven?" "Been up to it since breakfast," Ellis said. May handed him the written account. "Telegraph office, Agent Holt. Read the name back to me." "Garrett Holt, Federal Land Office, Millhaven," Ellis said without hesitation. "Tell him what happened here. The barn, the horses, the timing." She paused. "Tell him it was the night after we filed the complaint." Ellis looked at her steadily. He had the particular quality of competence that didn't need explaining or managing. It was just there, like good timber. "Yes, ma'am." He stood up, tucked the account inside his shirt, and went to get his horse. She watched him go. Then she turned and looked at what was left of her barn. Her father had built it in 1869. She knew that because he'd told her, because it had been one of the stories he told when he wanted to talk about when things were hard and got better. The first winter on the property, the barn half finished, the cattle in the open. He'd finished it in February with 2 neighbors who'd come to help without being asked. He'd told that story the way people tell stories about the moment they understood they were going to be all right. She looked at the black frame, and she did not cry. She had used up whatever she was going to cry a long time ago, and what was left in its place was something harder and more useful. "I can get lumber from the Henderson spread," Callahan said beside her. "They've got seasoned stock. Royce and Ellis can frame it back up in a week if we start Monday." She looked at him. He said it matter-of-factly, like a man accounting for what needed doing next and doing the accounting out loud so she could check it. "It's my barn," she said. "Yes, ma'am. You want to help frame it? I won't stop you." He paused. "I'm a reasonable hand with a hammer." Something moved in her chest, not the complicated, unnameable thing from the night ride, but something simpler and almost startling in its simplicity. Almost like the beginning of a smile. She turned away before it finished. "Let's see what the next 48 hours brings," she said. "Then we'll talk about lumber." The man came the following morning. He arrived at 9 o'clock on a well-kept roan, wearing clean clothes and carrying no visible weapon, which was its own kind of statement. He was 40-something with a lawyer's careful grooming and a businessman's neutral expression. He introduced himself as Warren Pruitt and said he represented certain interested parties in a private capacity and wondered if he might speak with Miss Whitman at her convenience. May looked at him from the porch. Callahan was beside her. Royce, arm-wrapped and expression unwelcoming, was behind them. "Go ahead," she said. Pruitt looked at Callahan. "He stays," May said. A slight adjustment of Pruitt's expression, not quite a flinch, but a recalculation. "Of course." He folded his hands in front of him, with the ease of a man accustomed to delivering uncomfortable messages in comfortable tones. "My clients are aware of the recent filings at the county recorder's office and of a federal complaint that may or may not be active in the territorial system. They want you to know that they have significant respect for your position and for the difficulties of the past year." May said nothing. "They'd like to make an offer," Pruitt continued. "Significantly above market value for the property, water rights included. Enough to establish yourself comfortably elsewhere. The offer comes with a full settlement of any competing deed, claims a signed release of the county filing discrepancy, and—" He paused with the air of someone producing a significant card. "A letter attesting that the original deed transfer was processed in error and has been corrected, releasing you from any liability in the dispute." She looked at him. "They're offering me money to go away," she said. "They're offering you a resolution," Pruitt said smoothly. "What about Carl Brower?" she said. "What about the resolution for what was done to his family?" Pruitt's expression remained professional. "My clients aren't in a position to speak to other transactions." "What about Thomas Braddock?" Callahan said. The name landed. Pruitt's professional expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted in the way things shifted when a man stepped on ground he hadn't expected to find. "I'm not familiar." "Riding accident," Callahan said. "Harmon County, 4 months ago. His widow sent a letter to the Red Creek County Recorder's office 2 days ago." He paused. "Signed and dated." 3 seconds of silence. "That letter," May said, "along with my father's journal, the original 1881 survey, Carl Brower's sworn statement, and the sealed federal complaint are being reviewed by Agent Garrett Holt of the Federal Land Office as of this morning." She held Pruitt's gaze. "Tell your clients that the offer is declined. Tell them the only resolution I'm interested in is the one that happens in a federal court." Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Callahan. He looked at Royce, who looked back at him with the patient expression of a man who had been up since 2 in the morning and had no patience left to perform. "I'll relay your response," Pruitt said. He picked up his reins. "Mr. Pruitt." May's voice stopped him. He looked back. "Tell your clients that I know Thomas Braddock's complaint didn't withdraw itself. Tell them I know what a manufactured riding accident looks like on paper when you put it next to a federal withdrawal letter." She paused. "And tell them that Agent Holt knows it too." Pruitt left without another word. She watched the roan go down the track. She stood on the porch in the summer heat, and she breathed, and she felt the thing in her chest that had been coiled tight for 4 days begin not to relax, not yet, but to recognize that the shape of the fight had changed. Callahan was quiet beside her for a moment. Then he said, "That was the last offer. I know. After this, whatever they do is harder, less deniable. I know that too." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with those steady dark eyes, and she met them directly. The way she'd been meeting things directly since the saloon floor, since her father's lockbox, since the moment she'd decided that going forward was the only direction that made any sense. "Are you worried?" He thought about it genuinely, not as a performance. "Not about the outcome," he said. "The record's built. The sealed filing protects it. What they do in the next few days is noise." He paused. "I'm careful. That's different from worried." She held his gaze. "Why does it not scare you men like Dunmore? You've seen what they do." Braddock was alone," he said quietly. "He didn't have the record built before they moved on him. He was trying to fight with one document against a system they owned." He looked at her. "You have 7. You have a federal agent who's been watching Crestline for 8 months and has a personal investment in this complaint succeeding. You have Brower's statement and a widow's letter, and a county clerk who flagged an error she didn't have to flag." He paused. "And you built all of that in 4 days, starting from a saloon floor." She looked at him. "You helped," she said. "Some," he said. "You knew where the fence post was." The following 5 days were the longest of her life, and also in a specific way, she hadn't expected the clearest. Agent Holt's investigator arrived on day 3, a federal deputy named Cross Compact and precise and utterly uninterested in the social hierarchy of Red Creek, who went through the county records with the thoroughness of someone who'd done this before and knew what buried things looked like. He interviewed Patricia Owens for 2 hours. He interviewed Carl Brower by telegraph. He requested Thomas Braddock's original federal complaint from the Harmon County records and compared the handwriting on the withdrawal letter to Ruth Braddock's account. On day 4, Harlan Deeds left town. He didn't announce it. He was simply there one evening and gone the next morning, his room at the boarding house empty, his personal effects cleared. Someone at the Rattlesnake said he'd gotten a wire the previous evening and gone pale reading it and left inside of an hour. May heard about it from Patricia, who heard it from the boarding house owner, who offered the information with the specific satisfaction of someone who had never liked Harlan Deeds and was not going to pretend otherwise. Morrison resigned on day 5. He walked into the county commissioner's office in the morning and put his badge on the desk and walked out. No statement. No explanation. The deputy, the thin, careful one, was made acting sheriff on an emergency basis, and he came to the recorder's office that afternoon to confirm that no outstanding actions were pending against May Whitman, which Patricia confirmed with the same professional calm she'd maintained through everything. That evening, Callahan found her at the north fence line. She'd gone out after supper. She didn't know why exactly, just that she needed to stand at the cedar post for a moment, the one with the split running down the grain, the one her father had chosen as a hiding place for the thing that would eventually matter. She stood there in the cooling evening with her hand on the rough wood, and she thought about a man who'd buried insurance at the property line and trusted his daughter to find it. She heard Callahan's boots on the dry grass before she heard him speak. He stopped a few feet from her and stood there, and neither of them said anything for a moment, which was easy by now. The silence between them had stopped being empty a long time ago. "Holt wired," he said. "Cross is recommending a full criminal referral. Crestline holdings, the county deed, discrepancies, the Braddock withdrawal, all of it." He paused. "Dunmore's name is in the referral." She kept her hand on the post. "Officially." "Officially." She closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Her father's voice in her memory, shaky and careful. "You'll know what to do." She opened her eyes. "The ranch," she said. "The deed, is it clear?" "The original registration stands. The falsified survey has been flagged as fraudulent in the county record. Your deed is clean." He paused. "It was always clean. Your father made sure of that in 1881. She turned to look at him then. He was standing in the evening light with his hat in his hands, the way he'd stood on the boardwalk after the saloon, that same uncrowded stillness, that same quality of being exactly where he meant to be. "What happens to you?" she said. "After this? The federal referral, Dunmore, you were part of this. Your name is in the complaint." "As a corroborating witness," he said. "Holt knows my history with Crestline. That's useful for the case, not dangerous for me." He held her gaze. I've been on this road for 2 years. I'm not sorry to have company on it." She looked at him for a long moment. The evening was cooling, the first real relief from the heat since morning, and somewhere in the grass, something was making its summer sound, and the sky was going that particular color. It went before dark, the pale gold that didn't last. "You said 3 reasons," she said, "when I asked you why you came." He nodded. "Your father, the saloon floor, what's being done is wrong." She looked at him. "Is that still the list?" He was quiet for a moment, that punctuation silence she'd learned to read. "No," he said. She waited. "There's a 4th one now," he said. "I'm not ready to say it plain yet, but it's there." She held his gaze. She felt the thing in her chest that had been quiet and specific and unnamed since the night ride. The thing she'd been careful not to look at directly. She felt it settle into a shape she recognized. Not rushed, not demanded. Just present the way Callahan was present, steady and real and patient enough to wait for the right moment. "When you're ready," she said. He nodded. He settled his hat back on his head. They walked back toward the ranch house together in the cooling evening, not close enough to touch, not far enough apart to suggest distance. The easy parallel movement of 2 people who had ridden 2 days and argued strategy and faced a sheriff and declined an offer and stood at a fence post and built something together that neither of them had been looking for when it started. The barn frame was still black against the sky. Monday, Callahan had said, "Lumber from the Henderson spread, Royce and Ellis with hammers." She'd already decided she was going to help frame it. Inside the house, she put the satchel on the kitchen table. She took out the contents one by one, the receipt, the survey, the journal, the filing confirmation, Ruth Braddock's letter, and she laid them out the way she'd laid them out in Holt's office in order the whole record visible. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she picked up her father's journal and held it in both hands and thought about a man who had seen what was coming and been too sick to fight it himself, and had done the only thing he could, had built the foundation, and trusted her to build the rest. She had built the rest. The federal referral was moving. Dunmore's name was in the record. Deeds was gone. Morrison was gone. The deed was clean, and the property was hers, and the ridge access her father had protected since 1881 was on the right map, in the right office, with the right stamp on it. And Carl Brower had ridden a day and a half at his age to say what needed saying, and Patricia Owens had left a door open that she hadn't had to leave open, and Ruth Braddock had mailed a letter from Harmon County and trusted that someone would use it right. And all of these people had taken a risk on the belief that the record properly built would hold. It had held. She set the journal down gently, the way you set something down that you intend to keep. Outside, she heard Callahan at the fence, checking the horses, doing the evening round, the practical, steady work of a man who was useful without being asked and present without being intrusive. She heard the familiar movement of someone who had found a place to be and was not in any hurry to leave it. She looked at her father's papers on the table. She thought about the saloon floor, the splinters in her palms, the sawdust smell, the laughter that had moved through the room like something rolling downhill. She thought about pressing her hands flat to the boards and making herself a promise. She had stood back up. She had always stood back up. But this time, standing up had not been the hardest part. The hardest part had been building the truth back piece by piece. When someone had spent months dismantling it, had been trusting the right people in a county where trust was expensive, had been finishing what her father started with shaking hands and a timeline he ran out of. She had done it. With help, she'd had the sense to accept, and on ground, she'd had the courage to hold. And with a record she'd had the patience to build, she had done it. Mae Whitman put her hand flat on the kitchen table, the same way she'd put it flat on the saloon floor, and the splinters were long gone, and the sawdust was long gone, and the only thing in the room was the truth she'd fought for, and the land her father trusted her with, and the certain unshakable knowledge that some things once earned can never be taken back. She had come to Red Creek to stand back up. She had done that and more. She had made sure no one else would have to fall the same way on the same floor for the same reasons at the hands of the same men. That was what her father had meant. That was what she had finished. And the Whitman land, clean and whole and rightly recorded, stretched north to the ridge under the summer stars, exactly as it had always been, exactly as it would remain.